My grandfather, Samuel, smelled of old books, pipe tobacco, and peppermint. He was the only person who ever seemed to speak my language. I remember one cold, clear night when I was 15, standing with him in the dome of his private observatory. He pointed his long, steady finger towards a faint constellation. "Most people look down, Ethan," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate with the hum of the universe. "They get so focused on the mud and the puddles at their feet that they forget to look up." He turned to me, his eyes twinkling in the dim light like the distant stars themselves. "Your parents, they are very good at navigating the mud. But you were born to look at the stars. Never let anyone convince you that your sky is not worth watching." It was the greatest gift he had ever given me, permission to be myself. I just never knew that he would one day leave me the entire sky and that my parents would try to tear it down. Growing up in my parents' house felt like being a foreign exchange student in a country where I could never quite grasp the language or the customs. Their world was one of manicured lawns, luxury sedans, and conversations that revolved around stock prices and the square footage of their friends' new vacation homes. My father, Richard, was a man who measured success in dollar signs. My mother, Cynthia, measured it in social status. I, with my head full of musical compositions and my fingers always itching to be on a piano, was a constant, baffling disappointment to them. Their disapproval was a low, constant hum in the background of my life. When I won a regional award for a piano composition at 17, their response was muted. "That is nice, dear," my mother said, her eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. "But you know, the Henderson's son just got accepted into Harvard Law." My father was more direct. "There is no money in that noise, Ethan. When are you going to get serious about your future?" Their definition of serious was a life I could not imagine for myself. Wanted me to be a lawyer, a banker, a surgeon, a title they could proudly drop at their country club dinners. My passion for music was, to them, an embarrassing hobby, a phase I was taking far too long to outgrow. The only person who took me seriously was my grandfather. Samuel was my father's father, but they were cut from entirely different cloths. While my father inherited his ambition, he had completely missed the part about character. Samuel was a self-made man who had built a massive fortune through shrewd inventions and investments, but he lived modestly. He valued curiosity, integrity, and passion above all else. He was the one who bought me my first grand piano, placing it in his own library so I could practice for hours without my parents' resentful sighs. "Your parents see a path," he told me once, after listening to a piece I had written. "See the one well-trodden road and are terrified of anything else. But genius, my boy, is never found on a paved road. It is found in the wilderness." My parents' relationship with Samuel was a study in contrasts. They revered his wealth, but resented his wisdom. They lived a lifestyle far beyond their own means, a fact made possible by my grandfather's reluctant but steady financial support. I would often overhear their hushed, frustrated conversations after a visit to his house. "He is just hoarding it, Richard," my mother would complain. "We had to get a new loan for the Mercedes because he would only give us half. It is embarrassing." "I know, Cynthia," my father would reply, his voice tight with frustration. "He lectures me about fiscal responsibility, then goes and spends a fortune on some rare telescope. He is losing his mind." He spoke of his money as if it were already theirs, a vast inheritance they were patiently waiting to claim. They saw him as a bank vault with a timer on it. I saw him as my anchor, my mentor, my only ally. They never seemed to notice or care that the person they dismissed as a foolish old man was the only one holding their gilded world together. They were so busy looking down at the gold-plated mud at their feet, they never realized he was teaching me how to navigate by the stars. That was a skill they would soon learn to fear. My grandfather's passing was quiet and peaceful. He died in his sleep, in the house he had built, surrounded by the books and inventions that were the map of his life. The grief I felt was immense, a vast, empty space in my soul where his wisdom and warmth used to be. My parents' grief, however, felt performative and brief. It quickly gave way to an impatient, buzzing anticipation. They were finally about to get what they had been waiting for their entire adult lives: The will reading took place a week after the funeral in the offices of Mr. Sterling, my grandfather's lawyer for over 40 years. He was a stern, no-nonsense man with eyes that seemed to see right through you. The conference room was tense. My parents sat together on one side of the polished mahogany table, dressed in somber but expensive black. They looked less like mourners and more like investors. Waiting for a crucial market report, I sat opposite them, feeling small and alone. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and began to read from the thick document. He started with a few minor bequests to longtime staff and distant relatives. My parents shifted impatiently in their seats. Then he came to the main section. To my son, Richard, and his wife, Cynthia, Mr. Sterling read. His voice devoid of emotion, I leave the sum of $100,000. A choked sound came from my mother. My father's face turned, a dangerous shade of red. $100,000 was an insult. It was less than they spent on their cars, Mr. Sterling continued. I also leave them this letter to be read aloud. He picked up a separate, sealed envelope. Inside, a single page in my grandfather's familiar, spidery handwriting was visible. Mr. Sterling read, Richard and Cynthia, over the past 30 years, my financial records show that I have given you, in various forms of support, a total of $4.7 million. You have lived a life of luxury on my dime, without ever learning the value of earning it for yourselves. I consider my financial obligations to you fulfilled. This final sum is a gift, not an entitlement. I hope you will finally learn to use it wisely. My mother let out a strangled gasp. My father looked as if he had been physically struck. But the lawyer was not finished. And now, for the remainder of my estate, Mr. Sterling said, turning a new page. This includes all properties, real and personal, all shares in Sterling Innovations. The complete investment portfolio and all liquid assets, valued at an estimated $87 million. I leave it in its entirety to my beloved grandson, Ethan Miller. The silence in the room was absolute. I could not breathe. Felt as if the world had tilted off its axis. It was an impossible number, a different reality. I looked at my parents. Their shock had curdled into a venomous rage. My mother's face was a twisted mask of disbelief. My father's eyes, when they locked on me, were filled with a terrifying, cold hatred. This is a joke, my father spat, his voice trembling with fury. He was a senile old man. Ethan manipulated him. He preyed on his failing mind. I can assure you, Richard, Mr. Sterling said calmly, that Samuel was of perfectly sound mind when he signed this will 3 months ago. I have a full psychiatric evaluation on file to that effect, which he insisted upon. My parents stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind them. I was left there, stunned, trying to process the tectonic shift that had just occurred in my life. Had not just inherited a fortune, I had inherited my parents' boundless resentment. The true betrayal came a week later. I was at my small apartment when a courier delivered a thick legal envelope. I tore it open, my hands shaking. Inside was a petition filed with the family court. My own parents, Richard and Cynthia Miller, were suing to have me declared mentally and financially incompetent. They were seeking to establish a conservatorship over me and my inheritance. With themselves appointed as the conservators, the document was filled with cruel, twisted half-truths. My passion for music was described as an obsessive and unprofitable fixation. My modest lifestyle was painted as evidence of my inability to function in the real world. They included statements from their friends, who described me as a reclusive and unstable young man. They were trying to use the very person I was, the person my grandfather had loved and encouraged, to legally declare me unfit, to strip me of my autonomy, and to steal the future he had given me. It was not just about the money anymore. It was a war for my own identity. They had not just declared me their enemy, they had declared me a non-person. For days, I was adrift in a sea of shock and fear. The words from the petition echoed in my head: financially incompetent, obsessive fixation, unstable. My own parents were trying to unmake me, to reduce me to a legal definition that would give them absolute power. They had called and left voicemails, their voices dripping with false concern. "Ethan, this is for your own good. You are not equipped to handle this. We are just trying to protect you." Protecting me felt a lot like being suffocated. I felt trapped, small, and utterly powerless against the legal machine they had set in motion. Just as I was about to sink into despair, Mr. Sterling called, "Ethan, I need you to come to my office. There's something you need to see. Something your grandfather prepared." I went, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in a week. In his office, Mr. Sterling had a grave but determined look on his face. "Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Ethan, not just in business, but in his understanding of human nature. He anticipated this. He knew your parents' greed would not simply vanish. It would metastasize." He then explained something called the guardian clause that Samuel had written into the will. The clause stated that, in the event anyone should formally challenge my competence, to inherit a specific set of instructions. Sealed in a series of envelopes was to be released to me by the executor. The clause was a dead man's switch, a final strategic move from my grandfather from beyond the grave. "He knew they would come after you," Mr. Sterling said. "He did not want to just leave you a fortune. He wanted to leave you the tools to defend it, and to defend yourself." He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the desk. My name was written on it in Samuel's hand. Inside was a letter, and a single, ornate brass key. I read the letter aloud, my voice trembling. "My dear Ethan, if you are reading this, then your parents have done what I feared they would. They have chosen greed over love. Do not despair. You're more capable than they could ever imagine. They see you as a dreamer, but I know you are a problem solver. Composer, after all, solves the problem of how to turn silence into beauty. I have left you a series of problems to solve. Think of it as our final composition. This key is the first note. The rest of the symphony is waiting for you. Your grandfather, Samuel." The key, Mr. Sterling explained, was for a private safe deposit box Samuel had maintained under a different name. The next day, we went to the bank. Inside the box was not money, but a set of meticulously organized files. The first file was labeled the borrower. It contained copies of 3 separate personal loan agreements between Samuel and my father, dating back 15 years, totaling over $1 million. All of them were in default. My father had never paid back a cent. At the bottom of the box was a second envelope. This one contained a riddle. Where we watched the worlds collide, I built a vault for truth to hide. I knew immediately. The observatory, the place where he taught me about colliding galaxies. That evening, I went to the observatory with a flashlight. It was just as he had left it. I searched for hours, and then I found it, a loose floorboard. Beneath his old armchair, underneath was a small, hidden safe. The combination was the date he had bought me my first piano. Inside the safe was a financial ledger and a small, digital voice recorder. The ledger was Samuel's private record of every dollar he had ever given my parents. It was a shocking chronicle of their boundless avarice. Money for cars, for country club fees, for failed business ventures, for jewelry, for vacations. It totaled over $4 million. My hands were shaking as I pressed play on the recorder. It contained a handful of audio files, all dated within the last year of his life. It was conversations he had secretly recorded with my parents. Their voices filled the silent observatory, whining, cajoling, demanding. "But Dad, everyone is going to Aspen for Christmas." My mother's voice pleaded. "We cannot be the only ones who stay home. Cynthia, I have already given you a substantial amount this quarter," my grandfather's calm voice replied. Then, my father's voice, sharp and angry. "It is our money too. We are your family. You're just going to let it all sit in some account and go to Ethan, who will probably waste it on a new piano." The final recording was the most damning. "If you leave everything to him, we will fight it," my father threatened. "We will prove he cannot handle it. We'll have him declared incompetent. We will take control. The money belongs to us, one way or another." My grandfather's voice was weary but firm. "The money is not a prize, Richard. It is a responsibility. And you have proven time and again that you are not responsible people. It was all there. The proof, my grandfather, had not left me a scavenger hunt. He had left me an arsenal. My parents were trying to paint me as unstable, but he had left me irrefutable evidence of their own instability, their greed, and their long premeditated plot to steal what was rightfully mine. The sadness in my heart began to harden into a cold, clear resolve. They had started this war. But my grandfather had given me the map to victory. The conservatorship hearing was held in a judge's private chambers, a room that felt both intimate and intimidating. The air was thick with tension. My parents, Richard and Cynthia, sat beside their lawyer, a smug-looking man named Mr. Davies. They exuded an aura of confident concern, the perfect picture of loving parents worried about their wayward son. I sat with Mr. Sterling, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the weight of my grandfather's evidence feeling heavy. And powerful in my briefcase, Mr. Davies began, his voice smooth and patronizing. He presented their case with theatrical flair, painting a picture of me as a fragile, reclusive artist, completely unequipped for the harsh realities of the financial world. He called my parents' friends as witnesses who spoke about my lack of ambition and my childlike obsession with music. He presented my modest bank statements as proof that I was financially naive. My parents watched me the entire time, their faces masks of pity, performance designed for the judge. "Your Honor," Mr. Davies concluded, gesturing towards my parents, "my clients are not acting out of greed, they're acting out of love. They simply want to protect their son from the crushing weight of a fortune he is not prepared to manage. They ask the court to grant them the ability to guide him, to safeguard his future." The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Judge Allister, looked at me. "Mr. Miller, do you have a response?" "I do, Your Honor," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. Stood up, and with Mr. Sterling by my side, I began my counter-offensive. "My parents' lawyer has painted a picture of me as irresponsible and naive," I started. "But this case is not about my competence. It is about my parents' character. And I have evidence to suggest they are the last people who should be entrusted with safeguarding anyone's future." Mr. Sterling presented the first exhibit. "Your Honor, these are copies of 3 defaulted loan agreements between the petitioner, Richard Miller, and his late father, Samuel Miller, totaling over $1 million. They demonstrate a clear history of financial irresponsibility." My father's face tightened. Mr. Davies objected, but the judge waved him off. Her eyes fixed on the documents. Next, I introduced the ledger. "This is a private ledger kept by my grandfather," I explained. "It details over $4 million in gifts and support he provided to my parents over the years. It shows a pattern not of protection but of parasitic dependence. I could see my mother flinch as if she had been slapped. The mask of loving concern was beginning to crack. My parents claim I am obsessed with my art," I continued, my confidence growing. My grandfather did not see it as an obsession. He saw it as a discipline. Believed that creating something of value was a far greater skill than simply spending what others had earned. Then came the final, devastating blow. "Finally, Your Honor," Mr. Sterling announced, placing a small digital player on the table, "we have audio evidence, recordings my grandfather made in the final year of his life, which I believe will speak directly to the petitioner's motives." My father shot to his feet. "This is an invasion of privacy. You cannot." "Sit down, Mr. Miller," Judge Allister commanded, her voice like ice. "I will hear it." Mr. Sterling pressed play. The room filled with my parents demanding. Entitled voices, followed by my grandfather's weary refusals. And then, the final recording played my father's explicit threat. "If you leave everything to him, we will fight it. We'll have him declared incompetent. We will take control." A deathly silence descended upon the chamber when the recording ended. The judge slowly removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at my parents, and her gaze was filled with a chilling, profound contempt. "In my 15 years on the bench," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "I have rarely witnessed such a transparent and despicable act of avarice. You have not come here out of love. You have come here with a premeditated plan to defraud your own son, based on your fury at being cut off from a man you clearly saw as nothing more than a source of funds. She looked at my parents. They were ashen-faced, utterly exposed. "Petition for conservatorship is dismissed with extreme prejudice," she declared, her voice ringing with finality. "Furthermore, I am ordering you, Richard and Cynthia Miller, to pay for your son's entire legal fees. And I am strongly considering referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential perjury and conspiracy to commit fraud." She looked at me, and for the first time, her expression softened. "Mr. Miller," she said, "your grandfather was a very wise man. It appears you have inherited far more from him than just his money. You are free to go." I stood there for a moment, the wave of relief so overwhelming it almost brought me to my knees. I had one. My grandfather had one. We had composed our final symphony together, and it was a masterpiece of justice. Walking out of that courthouse was like breathing fresh air after being trapped underground. The weight of my parents' treachery was gone, replaced by a quiet, solid strength I had never felt before. I was not just Samuel's grandson, the beneficiary of his fortune. I was Ethan Miller, a man who had faced down his own family's greed and emerged whole. The first thing I did was honor my grandfather's legacy. I used a portion of the inheritance to establish the Samuel Miller Foundation for the Arts, a nonprofit dedicated to providing grants and scholarships to young, struggling musicians, composers, and artists, the kind of people my parents would have dismissed. It was a way to ensure his wealth would do what he always intended: build new things, foster creativity, and support the passions that make life beautiful. Fulfilling his wish to build, not just consume, became my life's new mission. I kept the observatory, of course. It was my sanctuary. I had it carefully restored and converted the attached cottage into a home and a world-class recording studio. The space where my grandfather taught me about the universe became the place where I created my own. I finally had the freedom to compose without the pressure of needing to make a living, and my music flourished. I composed a full symphony, a tribute to my grandfather, which premiered to critical acclaim. The downfall of my parents was as swift as it was complete. The judge's threat was not an idle one. The district attorney did launch an investigation. While they were not charged with fraud, the financial scrutiny unearthed years of shady accounting and tax evasion. The IRS audit that followed was brutal. They were forced to sell their opulent house, their luxury cars, and my mother's jewelry to pay off their massive tax debts and penalties. The social fallout was just as devastating for them. The story of the conservatorship hearing, with all its humiliating details, became the talk of their social circle. They were no longer the power couple to be envied. They were the greedy, disgraced parents who had tried to swindle their own son. They were ostracized, their phones stopped ringing, and the country club invitations ceased. They were left with nothing but the token inheritance my grandfather had given them and the bitter taste of their own avarice. They had lost their status, their wealth, and their son, all in one fell swoop. I have never spoken to them again. There is a part of me that mourns the parents I wish I had, but that grief is overshadowed by the gratitude I feel for the grandfather I did have. He gave me more than a fortune. He gave me a final, profound lesson. He taught me that true wealth is not something you can inherit from a bank. It is the character you build, the integrity you defend, and the passion you refuse to let die. Sometimes late at night, I go up to the observatory dome and look through the massive telescope just as he taught me. I look past the mud and the puddles of the world below and fix my eyes on the endless beautiful expanse of the stars. So my parents tried to take my fortune, but my grandfather left me the universe. And in it, I finally found my place.